We've come down to the fifth. Welcome to the fifth edition of Grab a Coffee. Oh, how time flies. So, Raymond, we're back again, and we have been overwhelmed by the numbers that follow and listen to these conversations, just grabbing a coffee with ourselves.
I am actually impressed. I'm super impressed. We are in the tens of thousands now, which is a good place to be.
But as we say, it's not yet Uhuru, no time to start gloating.
No, not yet.
But just to say that now, a lot more of responsibility, a lot more of, what should I say, the weight of the yoke of this program is beginning to get heavier.
And some people are writing us. I don't know if you saw the comment on the last podcast. Someone wrote us almost 5 paragraphs of responses on the podcast. So some people are taking this a little bit more serious. I've also been hearing from different other quarters of people that I meet who say, thank you for this podcast. And they're giving their many views on how it should go, who we should host, who we should talk to. But yes, I am just happy that we are moving in the right direction.
If resources had allowed, this edition should have been held somewhere overlooking the St. Peter's Square as we wait for the conclave to sit, I think starting 7th of this month of May. And we get to have a first-hand account of the feel of the goings on, even though we would not be allowed into the Sistine Chapel. But yes, last week we did see the interment of Pope Francis and a close of his reign of humility and some level of rabble-rousing that he was also famous for. Any final words on the Pope that now finally put our backs to and look forward to the next pontiff?
Maybe not final words. So somewhere on the weekend, I got this very long interview that the Pope had done. Just before, I think he wrote a pastoral letter to all the bishops. And I was amazed at the amount of thinking that he had done on environment and climate change. I didn't imagine that he had that much bandwidth. And I was reading it, and I was very impressed about his suggestions on what we should do around the environment, the kind of boldness that leaders need to adopt around climate change. And I would say that's a part of the Pope I didn't know. And I think the funeral and the funeral proceedings and being bored by them led me down that path, and I was really amazed. I mean, I think he's taught us a lot. I saw in his death, of course, some major rapprochement. I saw our speaker who had been sanctioned by the US
and no
other than Joe Biden. Yes.
Take a selfie with him. And then we saw this US president who almost manhandled the Ukrainian president having a conversation.
A conversation with him in an empty hall almost. Yeah, the two of them. So there are things that in his death that we've seen that indicate that his legacy might live on. Yeah.
Incredible. And of course, I'm sure the story of his gift of a Lamborghini that he received and then had it sold and the proceeds given to the poor, that also possibly should ring forever. But other than that, what was your week like, Raymond?
I've had a very, very, very long week. I'm dressed in a suit. This should tell you everything. This should tell you everything you need to know about the week.
Era where we're seeing appointments coming in left, right, and center, are you now also joining the long list of ex-officio members of the Ugandan cabinet?
I wouldn't want to say no, because if the appointment comes in, I don't want to be caught off guard. But yes, I might take up a public role in the coming months, maybe years, but in the coming months, maybe years, around the work that we do in international relations, yes.
Wow, incredible. And that now brings us closer to what we intend to look at on this edition of Grab a Coffee. I mean, we are looking at, the news is we have a new ex-officio member of cabinet in the names of His Excellency, Dr. Adonia Ayebare, who is Uganda's permanent representative to the United Nations. Someone with a sterling diplomatic career. He has also been in our very own trade in journalism and communication, but he comes in as perhaps the only or second person holding that position. I think the other member, ex-officio member of cabinet, is Professor Ephraim Kamuntu. And we've not been told exactly what portfolio he's going for, because I think they're both ministers without portfolio. But I believe that what he brings on the cabinet table is his vast experience in international relations, our bilateral and multilateral relations with different, polities and of course institutions. What do you make of this kind of appointment, especially as we begin what is always termed as an election year?
Interesting. So first of all, congratulations to Adonia Ayebare,
Without a doubt,
who is known to us both individually and professionally.
And also maybe also indicate that's a well-deserved appointment. I think no.
It is. It's really merited and a well-deserved appointment. Perhaps even the most deserving would have been to make him the Foreign Affairs Minister. I think it doesn't come as a shock that he is being asked to step into a role in cabinet. I think part of the reasons behind that appointment are that increasingly members of cabinet need to get briefed on matters concerning foreign policy, matters concerning rapprochement around international relations, and some of that docket, which is the most important part of that docket, is being handled by Ambassador Adonia Ayebare. And I think the president's reasons are really simple. I need this man to be in cabinet, and the only legal way for him to be in cabinet is to make him an ex-officio member of cabinet.
To what extent or to what major serious effect is his brief to his colleagues in cabinet about those matters you talked about, if especially cabinet seem to be making very serious decisions and as far as foreign relations is concerned? Let's not forget that Diplomat 001 is none other than the President of the Republic.
Yes.
And the rest can only gravitate around him, not even the Ministers of Foreign Affairs.
I'm not often sold to the idea that our members of cabinet are just sitting ducks waiting for the president to order them and then they move. My understanding of our political system is it's a very delicate system. The president gets the final decision, but a lot of the discussions before that decision happen, yes. And members of cabinet are often very powerful members. They are, first of all, some of them are political appointees who are very powerful members in their local communities. And some of the diplomatic rapprochement is going to happen within their community, so they need to know. Two, some of them have what you'd call sensitive constituencies. For example, the Minister for Internal Affairs is one such example. The constituency inside the Minister of Internal Affairs includes the Uganda Police Force, the Uganda prisons, the security services, the army. Those are very sensitive constituencies, and they themselves have their own idea about how they want to behave. But Simon, to help our listeners understand, Uganda has been walking a very delicate path with its relationship with the West. Increasingly...
The rest, we mean the global north, as they put it.
Yes, so the West being the United States, the United Kingdom, Germany,
European
France,
Union, let's put
Italy,
it that way.
the European Union. And the reason Uganda has been walking a very tightrope with them is because we are a poor country, number one. Number two, we are heavily indebted, and we don't have enough financial resources to meet the goals and ends that we have as a country. So you want roads, you want a railway, you want electricity, but you don't have the money for those things. And some of that money is contained in some of the entities and bodies in which the West has a lot of control over.
Absolutely. Or even just their own policies coming in as development cooperation.
Yes.
Forget about loans from the Bretton Woods organization.
So whether that's the IMF and the World Bank, and you need a perception of them so that you can access them. But so because of that difficult place we are in, we've had to turn to non-traditional forms of financing. So some of those non-traditional forms of financing are, for example, our relationship with China, which has been growing and growing day in, day
much
out.
to the chagrin of the global north, as you know.
Yeah, we have a bilateral relationship with China, but we also have a trilateral relationship with China and the West in the institutional donors where they come from. Our second is our relationship with Russia. The president has increasingly been meeting the Russian ambassador and seeking out the Russians on some areas where he thinks that they can be of help.
Including a visit not so long ago by no less than the Foreign Affairs Minister.
Yes, the Foreign Affairs Minister.
Russia, the very amiable Lavrov.
Lavrov, exactly. And so the crisis of our foreign policy is that the enemies of the West should not be our enemies. And I think that's been the message that our foreign policy has been trying to communicate, that these enemies of the West are not our enemies. Where we think that they disagree or where we think that they fundamentally depart from internationally accepted norms, we will raise that matter. But that doesn't take away the fact that we crave a relationship with them. So in that rapprochement, of course...
And also the fact that we are willing sometimes to go against good relations on the altar of safeguarding what we believe is morally right from a cultural perspective.
Exactly.
And I think the rain started to beat us so seriously with the global north when we said, step down our feet and said, we will sign into law certain considerations that are dear to us, and the anti-homosexuality bill comes to mind.
Yeah, so those things, I mean, whatever your opinions on the bill, once it has become law, it's on the state, and therefore it's a state institution that can be used. So Adonia had become very important, and is very important in that regard, with a relationship with the West. One, to communicate Uganda's intentions to the West.
In a manner that is as you
as
say,
clearly as possible,
but also as
can
diplomatically as it should be.
Exactly.
Knocking on the right doors, finding the right receptive ears that will create an amplification.
Exactly. The other has been to reframe the relationship in light of the fact that we have new relations, stronger relations with China and Russia. And that can be a very diplomatically hard thing to hedge. It's not a problem of Uganda alone. It's a problem of Kenya too. The president of Kenya,
just came back from
has just returned from China.
From China, yes.
But his own foreign affairs minister, Musalia Mudavadi, had to arrest members of parliament who, whilst Ruto was traveling to China, wanted to travel to Taiwan, which would have created a major diplomatic scandal on the part of the president. So these are difficulties in the world that, as a young, small country in Africa with ambitions of their own, we have to navigate. The big boys are fighting, but we have to navigate and get our own interests through. So I think that this appointment serves that purpose.
And also, really, to add more shine to Adonia's boot is to say that whereas we're looking at what he could do or what he has done behind the covers, there is one important major win that one can say is he may not have worked alone as a lone ranger, but he certainly led the safeguarding of the fact that Uganda did not lose the United Nations logistical base in Entebbe.
In Entebbe.
You know, that had really gone to our eastern neighbors.
Sure.
And for many reasons, and that's why. Can you imagine if Uganda had lost that logistical base, the number of jobs that would have been affected, the amount of income that comes in from provision of goods and services to the staff of the United Nations that are in there? We have whole villages created out of the fact that we have that UN base in Entebbe. I mean, a whole neighborhood like Lubowa would certainly possibly become the kind of neighborhood that we never wish it to be if that had happened. And we can say that without a fear of contradiction, that Ado, in his very diplomatic and amiable style, did ensure that we retain that base here. So
exactly.
If he has scored a few points, that is one of those.
That's one of them. And the other, which is a very important point, is the fighting in the DRC. Mm-hmm. The fighting in the DRC has two aspects to it. It's that Uganda has its army deployed there, but the United States has adopted to have a transactional relationship with the DRC.
And which they're not hiding and feeling sorry
Yes.
about. You saw the advisor to President Trump, who was here, and the kind of statements he made both here in Kampala and in Kinshasa, and also in relation to Kigali.
Yeah. So it's going to fall a lot to Adonia to try and interpret the US interests in the DRC and communicate those interests to Uganda and get Uganda to respond to those interests in a way that either enhances Uganda's relationship with the US, or in other ways, in a way that effectively communicates disagreements.
And let's not forget that Kigali and Kampala are really, for all intents and purposes, joined at the hip on so many things. And
we are joined at the hip, but we have some disagreements, for example, on the way the Eastern DRC should move forward. Absolutely. So whilst we both agree that there should be a peaceable and peaceful DRC, we might disagree on, for example, the stationing of troops inside the DRC. We might disagree on the movement of troops inside the DRC, because the movement of troops affects the movement of rebels and then affects the movement of troops on either sides of the countries.
Again, who would be better placed than Adonia, who has served as Uganda's ambassador to Rwanda, to try and see how these sometimes tactical differences can then be brought to some kind of harmonious.
Yes, but the other thing that we shouldn't leave out is that Adonia also brings an understanding of domestic constituencies, because our foreign policy is only as good as the domestic constituency. And he has a proper understanding of the domestic constituency back here at home. He knows who to go to for what decision. He knows who to talk to move what kind of the piece of the puzzle. And I think to take that pressure away from the president of having to supervise every single decision is what he will be doing inside of cabinet.
He then therefore stands out as a huge outlier to what's normally held as a notion of saying, oh, we need more of career diplomats, people who join the foreign service as possibly interns to officers, supervisors, to first officers, and then down to ambassadorial level, as opposed to people just coming in as political appointees and taking almost very senior, or the most senior positions at their respective posts. Adonia didn't come in really as so much of a career diplomat. He came in as a political appointee for a peace process. I think that's why he cut his diplomatic teeth running the Burundi peace process, working together with the Nelson Mandela Foundation and even Nelson Mandela as an individual. And he's grown and also, decided to take a path professionally and study and, acquire, postgraduate education and the like. But Raymond, suffice it to say is we're looking at Uganda's foreign policy. Well, it's hinged on what foreign policy all over the world is all about. If you look at the Rome Statute, it's about diplomatic relations and how countries relate from a political perspective, both mutually reinforcing and otherwise. But we're also increasingly seeing the need to push for economic diplomacy. And there's been talk of downsizing our foreign missions, which are already 38 in number as compared to our neighbors in East Africa. But in East Africa, I realized that we have the second fewest number of diplomatic missions across the world. We only beat Burundi, which has, I think, about 28, and we have 38. Kenya has 50 plus, Rwanda has 50 plus. Even South Sudan, the youngest country in the world, has more foreign diplomatic missions than ourselves. And we've been hearing of talk that Uganda may be looking at downsizing, but at a time when our foreign policy is changing and looking towards economic diplomacy, as opposed to what it used to be in the past. You were talking about our new allies to the Far East in China. But let's not forget, I think the Middle East has now Uganda's biggest diaspora in terms of absolute numbers. Yeah. And yet you have possibly one post, I think that in UAE, that is supposed to cover that kind of arrangement. And that's why we're also seeing a lot of direct foreign investment coming in and the like. So Adona seems to be very strong in the geopolitics and the multilateral political engagements between our polity and our other partners. But what about the aspect of economic diplomacy?
I think it's not just down to Adona alone. There's been a fantastic, and I'm really happy, there's been a fantastic change at the Foreign Affairs to try and link Uganda's foreign policy initiatives to its economic growth. So increasingly, the PS at Foreign Affairs, Mr. Wajire, has let out money to foreign missions to conduct economic diplomacy summits.
Especially for tourist attraction.
Yes, we've seen some in China, we've seen some in the UK where the Uganda Airlines is going. But this aggressive tilt to link our foreign policy objectives to our economic objectives is not a Ugandan thing alone. It's the fact that many people now realize the success of polity is the success of states. Comes with economic success. If you don't have economic success, then the polity suffers.
Even on the table, you just cannot speak as equals.
Exactly. So that rapprochement is happening already within the Foreign Affairs Office. What I am most worried about now is the strategy with which we go about it. Many Ugandans domestically are opposed to the government initiatives locally, and that could affect our foreign missions. So if you find, for example, the Ugandan parliament, some things are simple things like bureaucracy. The Ugandan parliament takes a long time to arrive at decisions. And if you take, say, 5-6 sittings to arrive at a decision, what happens when Uganda's biggest trading partner, like South Sudan, is descending into civil war, and the South Sudanese government has asked the Ugandan army to come in,
and then you have parliamentary approval.
Yes, they need a parliamentary approval. If they're going to wait 5 sittings, which might be almost a month,
even more.
Yes, then that might be a problem. So it's going to have a tug of war now to have domestic constituencies respond. Other things are small and tiny things like UNBS, turnaround time at UNBS. If Mukwano needs a UNBS sticker on all their 2 million goods that they're going to export to South Sudan, how quickly can you turn that around? So those things are outside of the ambit of the foreign affairs, and yet they will affect the economic diplomacy effort or the foreign affairs unit. So they will require strategy at some point. And I am keen to see how they go about it in terms of strategy.
Well, we're also looking at a situation where even as there is talk about downsizing our missions from 38 to even 15 or half of that, we are looking at circumstances where, did you know, for example, that our mission in Washington covers the whole of South America? So can you imagine that geographical heaviness in terms of, So we have few missions overburdened by the geographical space and policies they have to deal with, heavily underfunded in terms of even having the right personnel and the right number of personnel. Averagely at a Ugandan mission, you'll find 4 to 5, max 6, but it's an average of 5 people running a diplomatic mission. I mean, I was privileged to work at the European Union, and there was an officer and another for almost every facet of the operation. So you had the European Union having diplomats coming into more than 30, running for a country such as Uganda. Now you imagine the flip side of it is that you had Ambassador Miriam Black, who was, best I think then in Brussels, running several European entities, and then of course you had one in London at Trafalgar Square, and then possibly someone in Copenhagen, and that's just about it.
Yeah, I mean, you can only cut your cloth. So you cut your coat according to your cloth, and Uganda doesn't have the amount of resources at its disposal to exhaustively cover all the countries in which it wishes to have relations with. This is where, for example, you envisage things like consuls, where you don't have a mission, but you can have a consul who conducts your relationship with that country. The Vienna Convention on Diplomatic Relations has been wide-ranging to enable things like that.
Yes.
But I also feel increasingly that the Foreign Affairs Office in Uganda has desks which can deal with some of these matters as and when they arise. Now, the question is, what do you go out to the world with? Our most important relationships as Uganda are the relationships with our neighbors. We are a young, landlocked country. Everything about us requires us to be open to the world, whether that is bringing in fuel, whether that is exporting food that grows here,
and
whether
now
that is
looking forward exporting fuel.
Exactly, whether that also includes services and the service sector. You need to have an open foreign policy. You need your neighbors to love and like you, but you need your neighbors also be very peaceful and peaceable at all times, because you can't conduct a relationship with someone who has conflict.
You raise a very important issue. Let's look to our neighbor in the east. For more than a year or plus, we don't have a high commissioner in Nairobi. But for the most part, you know that they are our getaway to the rest of the world, at least the most feasible route to the seaport. And sometimes we have had situations where we politically agree on certain things, but the actuation of which doesn't seem to take the case, because then Kenya goes back into looking at their domestics and how they would benefit more if they played hardball. Case in point is bringing of fuel and into the hinterland of Uganda, and imports of such items as sugar, where they prefer to get from Nether as opposed to importing from Uganda, that balance of trade being affected. You talked about cutting our quota according to our cloth, but sometimes we leave diplomatic missions almost
No. But I mean, for Kenya's example, we have a mission in Nairobi, we have a mission in Mombasa. We have 4 ministers in Uganda, a deputy prime minister, no less, in charge of East African affairs, who is in charge of that relationship too. You have a state minister for regional integration, who is in charge of that relationship too. So you have many people who are engaged in a day-to-day.
Do you feel the confidence that these guys are working as a unified government, or each one runs as a silo, as seems to be happening in many government ministries, departments?
Yeah, I think now that's the problem of the efficiency within government, but it's not a problem of the representation. But in terms of having an effective and functional relationship with Kenya, I think we've done well. In terms of having a functional and effective relationship with Tanzania, we've done immensely well.
What about with the DRC, which is, with all standards, the biggest importer of things from Uganda?
Yeah,
huge market.
So I mean, and that's the thing. Like, there are two different issues here. Tanzania and Kenya own the coastline. They have the quickest access coastline that Uganda can use. So whether Kenya determines how you can trade with the world, because if you're going to trade by maritime, then you need Kenya or Tanzania. Tanzania is the longer route, Kenya is the shorter route. Over time, I think we have been successful in getting our neighbors to appreciate the role of regional integration. So by getting Somalia also into the East African community, we expanded the coastline,
yes,
to include Somalia.
If only it could be as peaceful as it should be.
Yes, and we've expended a lot of resources as Uganda to try and secure Somalia. So that also indicates that we have long-term visions and long-term strategy. Now, some of these things are 100, 200, 300-year strategy. If you're sitting at the Foreign Affairs Office, what is the 300-year strategy for Uganda? What does it look like? Uganda should be able to enmesh into an East African community where you don't have tariffs for goods coming in and out of Uganda. That's the only way you succeed. So you need to get your neighbors to accept to get into an economic integration, which they're already in, and then move to a political integration.
Which possibly comes in at the tail end of
Yes.
it all, because you need to first fix the nuts and bolts down here.
Exactly. And then you start to discuss who is going to be the logistical hub for this integrated unit. That logistical hub can be Mombasa. That logistical hub can be Somalia. That it can be Tanzania. And those are discussions that any foreign affairs minister of Uganda should be engaging in. You need to engage in long-term strategy. And sometimes you need to tire out our regional neighbors. You need to tire out the foreign affairs minister of Kenya and the foreign affairs minister of Tanzania and the foreign affairs minister of Somalia. Those are people you need to be on a call with every time. Now, who is going to finance this? Because you're not, all of you are
looking at
yes,
who.
it's a convention of bald-headed men with a comb. So you still need people who will finance this. Very luckily for us, the world has shifted in such a way that middle powers who have a lot of money at their disposal are looking for logistical hubs.
Yes.
So whether you talk about Turkey, whether you talk about the United Arab Emirates, all of those are looking for logistical hubs. We have something to offer, but that offer can only come if we're an integrated unit. If you tell DP World, which is one of the biggest logistical companies in the world, that you're going to offer them a port in Mombasa, that port has to be able to take in as many container units as possible. And you can't get those container units unless you're able to move them from Rwanda, from DRC, from Uganda to the port. Now,
and seamlessly in a very fast and effective way.
So those things require a lot of domestic talking. Those things also require businessmen to agree to some things.
And also some, great synergy in as far as the infrastructure is concerned. You don't have a standard gauge railway coming and stopping somewhere, and then the other person has a meter gauge railway coming through, and then the other has dilapidated roads in the northern corridor, the other still fixing themselves. So yes.
So those are the things that the foreign affairs minister needs to look at. First, we need to look at our neighbors and make sure that our neighbors are peaceable, peaceful, and ready to live with us. But number two, we need to get our neighbors to appreciate that we win as a whole, not as individuals.
Let me take it down back to where we started this conversation, from the issue of Adonia in cabinet as an ex-officio member, and you three in some wildcard comment, I don't know whether our listeners really picked it up and said, he's very qualified, more else he could even have been the most suitable foreign affairs minister. Yeah. And that is where sometimes the rain starts beating some of these astute and efficient people that come into government service. There is already a substantive minister of foreign affairs. Yes. And now he comes an ex-officio cabinet member who brings on board that the Minister of Foreign Affairs could possibly have brought on board. And for some, they could read it as a vote of no confidence in the proficiency of the Minister of Foreign Affairs. Is another point where now they begin to lock horns, and at the end of the day, we lose the bigger strategic outlook of what this inclusion of an astute head into cabinet could have brought on board at the altar of interpersonal ego fights.
I don't know, and I don't think that they should think of it that way. I think you should think of it as complementary efforts.
That's in what it should be.
Yes, you should think about it as...
It could be different.
I mean, it could be different, but you should think about it that way. You can have, for example, say you have a country like the UK, which says our most important relationship is the US. They will send an ambassador, they'll send a special envoy, they will send someone very specific to Donald Trump, and the idea is to get as many people as possible.
Whispering the same thing.
Yes, then you will have the king appointing members of his royal family to go and become close to members of the US political elite, to try and, one, curry favor, but also try and understand points of agreement, points of disagreement. So these people come with complementary efforts. If you are Jeje Odong, the foreign affairs minister, Adonia comes with complementary efforts. The point is not to fight him. The point is to say, okay, as a complementary effort, how does this unit start to work better so that we complement you and make you more efficient in your role? The more efficient he gets, the more efficient the Foreign Affairs Ministry gets, and the minister by extension.
Raymond, we have a situation where we're getting to an election year.
Yes.
And let's not forget that all the ministers at the Ministry of Foreign Affairs also hold
Political positions.
Adonia does not.
Yes.
So when we now take off the couple of months for politicking and all that, essentially what are we saying? That Adonia is the prima facie Minister of Foreign Affairs. And that's also no guarantee that when they go into the fray of politics, by the time they return and a new government is formed as of 18th of May 2026, that these guys will continue to hold those.
No, I tend to say, futures have a way of falling down mid-flight. So don't think so much about the future. Think about the task at hand.
Look at this contradiction, Raymond. On one hand, you talk about having a 300-year strategy.
Yes.
And you're telling me to look at the future of
No.
next
The strategy doesn't mean you don't look at the future. It's just that you need to be aware that futures can fall down mid-flight. For example, today, the Chinese Communist Party has a way in which it perceives China should look like in the world in the next 150 years. In fact, I think last week they released the fresh Communist Manifesto papers, which indicate where they are going. So predicting the future.
I actually get scared when you some of these comments.
Yes. So I mean, you can be the Henry Kissinger of Uganda, as Jeje Odom, to say, my last rodeo, my last dance as a foreign affairs minister will be, how will Uganda look like 50, 100 years from now? And you can craft that vision, leave it at the Foreign Affairs Ministry, and all these ambassadors who come in then start to feed off your vision. And you have a lot of legway to do that. David Cameron was a foreign secretary of the UK for less than 10 months, I think. He was appointed at the tail end of Rishi Sunak's, but he drafted the foreign policy white paper of the UK, which they haven't departed much from since he left. So you still have time. Focus at the task at hand. Everyone has their task. And I keep telling my friends, if the president called me, Raymond, and gave me a task, in my execution of that task, I am not competing with other people. My job is to execute the task to the best of my abilities. If they say, Raymond, we want to have the best relationship with Rwanda that we can get now and in the near future, that's my job. If I go into Rwanda, my job is to work with the Rwandan ambassador of Uganda there and talk to them and say, I am here to execute this very simple task of mine. In the execution of my task, this person serves a complementary role. If Adonia needs to type a foreign policy paper, where is he going to do it? Foreign Affairs Office. So Jeje Odom has created an office for him where he can sit and type and think. And these complementary efforts are the only way forward. I don't think that fighting each other will help.
You have spoken exactly something that I would say comfortably you've stolen out of my lips. The fact that when you get an assignment, you focus on that assignment and every other thing around you is just background noise. And I believe that if this happens the way it should happen, then we'll see indeed the fruition of what we have.
Of course, now that he's going to be engaged with domestic cabinet decisions, someone is going to have to look at the permanent mission. So someone is going to have to spend time thinking about the permanent mission at the UN.
Yeah, not just at the UN. There are all these chairmanships that he keeps holding every regularly and all that. He just handed over the non-aligned movement, G77 and all that. And then different other, trilateral and bilateral engagements. So it's going to be a stretch on him. And let's conclude this conversation around his personal energies we both know him. Yes. I think we need, from what we know about Adonia, to allay the fears of some of our usual skeptics who believe that possibly there's just too much that's been put on his shoulders. Can you comfortably say that Adonia still has the firepower and the wind beneath his wings to execute this too? Yeah,
I am terribly biased because the man is too close to me. But I can say for a fact. So let me tell you a very personal story. When I was going for the Kufatirembo with my wife, which is the traditional ceremony, Uganda and Rwanda were called with each other. And I entrusted him with the task of opening the door to say, look here, I come from a sufficiently political family, so some political figures are going to walk through
the border,
a compound that traditionally might be hostile to them. And You should have seen him when he entered that compound and the temerity with which he carried himself to tell the members on the other side that, we have brought our son. You might have grievances with the old people who are like us, but don't carry them down to the children. And that's a good rapprochement. But at a very professional level, I have also worked with him at a professional level. He doesn't sleep. If he has a task, he will execute it. Number two, he has a very switched on head. He doesn't need to read too much to get a task done because he spends most of his time reading. So he has this wealth bank of knowledge across multiple disciplines that he's able to summon with ease. Number three, which is where he succeeds a lot, he has an impressive network of friends across the world. He can pick up the phone and call as many people to try and solve a matter. And some of these are problems Uganda has had, which he has solved with just a phone call. So he has that at his disposal. Of course, there will be temperaments, and those temperaments, I hope, play out well within the foreign affairs docket. But none of those should wish away the fact that, he's been given a very specific task inside of cabinet that he must execute.
Considering that indeed, like you said, you put a disclaimer, you know him too well, too biased.
Yes, I'm too biased.
I also wish to share a personal anecdotal story around my workings with Adonia, and especially coming down to the fact that you said one thing for sure, he doesn't sleep, especially when he has a task on hand.
He does.
So many years ago when I was in active journalism, Adonia arranges as our fixer for an interview between a regional head of state from one of the countries in the region. Let me be very specific. The late Nkurunziza, president of Burundi, and the Nation Media Group. And I was the focal guy to lead the interview for the Nation Media Group across all its platforms, TV, radio, and newspapers, and across all the regions where it was publishing. And I was to go with a group led by no less than the chief of finance from the National Media Group and the chief executive officer from the National Media Group, and then of course our local managing director and other provisional, directors and all. Guess what happens?
You forgot.
No, I missed the flight.
I know the story.
And my managing editor at the time, who usually sweltered into his office well past 9:30 a.m. in the morning, called me from his office landline at exactly 6:30 a.m. and says, "Simon, I am told you're still within Ugandan airspace." I said, "You won't believe it, sir, but I'm very sorry." There are many reasons why I missed the flight, and it was none of my fault, but I had missed the flight. The editor just simply told me, "Simon, you know that what you've done is a fireable offense, but I need that story anyway." In other words, I had been fired, phone just went off, and I was dead. My mind was at a freeze point. Adonia was in New York. This is 6:30 a.m. in Uganda. What time was it in New York? In the middle of the night.
Yeah, it was middle of the night.
Thank you very much. I placed the phone call to him, and just the moment he picked the phone, he just laughed and said, "I have been told." Long story short,
yes,
he fixed the interview at now my convenience and saved me from being kicked out and fired. But we did it in such a manner that my bosses from the Nation Media Group are only getting to know about this now. This podcast. That's how long he keeps secrets, and we're talking about over 15 years ago.
Yes, he keeps a lot of secrets. I know. I mean, people take for granted when a head of state calls you and makes you a special envoy to another head of state. But the reason heads of state do that is that they need someone that they can trust to give a very specific message to be delivered in very specific terms.
And keep all the cards to the air.
So, for example, if a head of state asks me, Raymond, to meet you, Simon, as another head of state and says, "Go and tell Simon I am going to punch his head," they need to trust that you're the kind of person who will go and tell Simon that my head of state has said they're going to punch your head.
And that you should receive the message with the kind of tenacity that the other one sent it with.
And then they rely upon you to keep that with you till you go to the grave.
Grab a coffee, our 5th edition, suddenly coming to an end, but we want to drop in something new on the program. I mean, what's grabbing a coffee without sometimes grabbing a book to read? So this week, I challenged Raymond to say I will go first and pick a book to read because I am getting very much in love with especially the goings on in as far as our foreign relations is concerned.
Are you becoming an ambassador?
Well, I have.
Please, when you get there, remember me.
I mean, I picked the book in relation to our big topic of the day, which is Adonia's ascent to cabinet as an ex-officio. Yes. But I have a book with me here by no other than the, I would say, grandfather of diplomatic relations, yes. The one and only Henry Kissinger, who was National Security Advisor and Secretary of State to two American presidents in Iran, has advised several others, including until recently President Barack Obama. That's, the 1973 Nobel Peace Prize winner, Henry Kissinger. In this book, Leadership, yes. He writes about 6 world strategies after the Second World War. He looks at 6 leaders scattered across the world and their strategy to bring their countries onto the league of top nations, and what they used to create that kind of you call it rapprochement?
Yes, rapprochement.
Absolutely. And so he was looking at historical perspective. Don't forget that Henry Kissinger is a scholar in his own right.
Yeah.
But he was also looking at
Harvard professor, no less.
Absolutely. Yeah. His experience in the diplomatic world, but also most importantly because he was there at the time, his personal knowledge of the events and the people he writes about. And I'll give you a quick recap of what I've so far seen. He writes about none other than Konrad Adenauer, who was the German who came in shortly after Germany is defeated, humiliated and all. And this guy comes in with a strategy of humility. Then he talks about Charles de Gaulle, the French president, who comes in with the strategy of will. Then he talks about Richard Nixon, his own president back home, who brought the United States onto this League of Nations through the strategy of equilibrium. And the details are in there. He also writes about Anwar Sadat, the guy from the Middle East who comes in with the strategy of transcendence. And then he writes about, of course, the man that every Ugandan politician of later days likes to refer to, Lee Kuan Yew, who came with a strategy of excellence because he had transformed his polity into a very successful meritocracy of a city-state, and it was everything else. Margaret Thatcher, who was now leading what was termed at the end of the World War II as the sick man of Europe.
Yes.
In Britain. Who comes in with a strategy of conviction. And all these complement each other. You're talking about complementary roles, complementary strategies that eventually give birth to the world order as we know it post-Second World War. Exactly. I mean, if you're looking for a book to read to understand how these nation states and the big hegemonies have been created,
And Kissinger is the perfect person to help people move away from their emotional convictions. When you're dealing with state affairs, you need to detach your emotional convictions.
You have to act with tact and detachment.
Yes, and start to deal with the strategic, then link the strategic to the tactical, then detach your emotions. Because you will advise the president on a matter emotionally and they will not take your advice. And because they've not taken your advice, things might not go the way they planned. And
by the time they remember to come and take your advice, it's too late. Yes. Other emotions have taken place.
Exactly. So he's the perfect person. I hope that many of our leaders can spend some time reading. He's also the perfect person on how to talk to your enemies. He wrote a book on China when the US and China were at the crux of their enmity. And he wrote that book after spending time with Mao Zedong when everyone thought and felt no national security advisor of the US should ever have a relationship
in China. Forget about a relationship, even a foot in China.
Exactly. So he's taught the world a lot. He also has his flaws. He has his deep flaws and dark points.
But he's human anyway.
He's human anyway, exactly.
So yes. We have come to an end of our conversation here. Grabbing a Coffee continues, and want to thank you for catching us wherever it is that you get your podcasts. And yes, we shall meet same time, same place next week with yet another conversation that Raymond and I will find important to share with you. It's a wrap.